I thought I'd take you through my process of how I needle felted Sadness from the film Inside Out, warts and all. This turned out to be a bit of an epic felting project where I had to come up with some new ways of felting texture and severely tested my hairdressing skills, and I only had a small amount of time to finish her.
Okay, here we go.
I love the film Inside Out, and I really wanted to make Sadness as much a perfect felted replica as I could. I wanted to make her posable like Disgust, so I started by referring to an image of Sadness and drawing out the size of the armature so that it would be the right size in proportion to her head that I had already felted for a previous video. Don't worry, I'll show you how I felted the head and face later. So I found some 6mm diameter chenille stems or pipe cleaners in my craft box to make the armature. They're 30cm or 12 inches long, by the way. I followed the drawing with the chenille going from the neck, leaving a bit sticking up to be glued into the head, down one leg and then back round to make the foot, up the length of the leg and then down to make the other leg and back up again, and twisting it around the body. This technique would normally be fine, but because I had to size the armature to be in proportion to the head I'd already made, the body had to be very small, and in comparison the chenille was quite thick. As you'll see later, this caused one or two issues, but I'll explain how I overcome this later on. So for the arms, I've used another chenille and wrapped it around the centre. Make sure you go out from the middle to form the shoulders, and then down the top of the arm to the elbow, and then across inwards to the hand. I'd drawn it in this position to ensure that Sadness's hands could meet in the middle and be clasped in that anxious kind of way that she does. Then at the hand I folded it back on itself, but try not to leave a big loop at the end as I've done here, as this is another one of those pesky issues that I have to deal with later on. Then to secure the arms even more, you can use the remainder of the body piece to go over the right shoulder and then under the left armpit, then over the left shoulder and then under the right armpit. Wrap the remaining around the body. This will be fine because Sadness's body is quite wide anyway. Then I started wrapping core wool around the body under the arms. One of the main reasons I like using chenille is because when you wrap wool round it, it grips really easily and doesn't slide round as it would if you'd use wire. And there's no glue or floral tape necessary. You can just wrap it and stab it around her middle. It took a while to build up enough layers of core wool to make her body shape nice and wide. Here I was using a thicker needle. This was for two reasons. One, the needle is less likely to break if I hit the wire in the chenille. And two, it felt slightly quicker. But you can use a fine needle. Just don't stab too hard and you'll be less likely to break it. I added about 5 layers of wool around her middle until her body shape was about right. This took me about 45 minutes.
That's a long way.
Don't worry, I've skipped ahead through most of it. But before moving on, make sure you decide where her jumper ends and that her legs go from wide at the top down to very thin. Also wrap some core wool around her arms as she has quite a thick jumper on. So because I decided to make Sadness so small, her feet are a real challenge, as we need to get the details of her dark blue shoe, some of her legs showing in the light blue, and then her trousers also in dark blue. So I decided that as her leg was underneath her shoe and trousers, it would be logical to felt that on first. Wrong. The chenille was showing through in some places and the leg was far too wide in others, so I pulled it all off and started again, this time only using a tiny piece of light blue carded wool around her leg and foot, which isn't easy as the wire tends to be right where you want to stab. Then I added some dark blue carded wool to the bottom of her foot and wrapped it around the toe area of her foot to make the shoe. For the second foot, however, I felted it in a different order. I started by wrapping the dark blue wool to cover her foot and then wrapped a thin strip of light blue around her ankle. This turned out to be a much easier way of forming the shoe shape. I think this was because as I wrapped the light blue around her ankle, it naturally made a neat line over the dark blue. There was still the odd bit of black chenille showing that I had to cover, which was very faffy and fiddly. My favourite combination. Then I took another look at the first foot that I'd felted and wasn't happy. So out came the scissors. This leg was looking too far, so I've chopped some off so you can see there's now bits of black showing through. As you can see, I had to then cover the black with a bit more blue wool, more faffy and fiddly bits. In retrospect, before I started covering the chenille, I should have trimmed the black fluff from around her feet and around her hands, so that there was less black fibres to bulk them out and cover. It would have been a lot easier to make her feet nice and small. Anyway, moving on, I managed to coat her trousers with some dark blue wool with no problems, stopping at where her jumper begins and making sure to leave a little bit of light blue showing for her leg. For the hands, I wrapped some of the light blue carded wool round, but again I should have trimmed some of the black fibres away from the chenille stems items first. This would have made them slightly less bulky.
Oh no, I did it again!
If you look at the image of Sadness, she has 5 little fingers. So of course I thought I'll make a proper little hand with fingers. This proved to be even more faffy and fiddly than the feet, but strangely satisfying. To make sure you have fairly even-sized fingers, I'd recommend preparing all your wool for each finger first. To felt each individual finger, take a small amount of light blue carded wool and roll it between your fingers into a small sausage shape. Then keep stabbing and rotating it round to make a tiny cylinder, leaving one end unfelted to attach it with. Then attach the shortest of your fingers, which will be the little finger, first, and work your way along the hand, attaching each finger by felting the fluffy end onto the back of Sadness's hand, right next to the previous finger. Make sure you attach the thumb slightly sticking out to the side. So here I've knitted up the hands, stabbing along the fingers to make them slightly shorter and stabbing the back of the hand to smooth it out. At this point I was fast running out of time. I had the jumper to do, the hair, and I had to figure out how to make her glasses. Maybe felting 10 fingers was a mistake. I ploughed on to tackle the jumper. I really wanted to get the texture of the jumper looking like Sadness's, so I experimented by taking a piece of felted core wool and splitting some pieces of white regular craft wool and laying it onto the felted wool in one direction and then in another, and stabbing it down to make like a jumper texture.
This looks new.
Think it's safe?
What is it?
Yeah, I wasn't convinced with the results either, and it was also very faffy and time consuming. So I looked at the image of Sadness and realised that it's mainly the ribbing around the bottom of the jumper, the wrists and the neck that's textured. So first I coated the jumper in a white merino wool, which is a finer wool and gives a slightly more cuddly soft finish than the carded Jacob core wool I was using. So after this I wrapped a strip of merino wool around the bottom of the jumper where the ribbing would be, and I stabbed vertical lines down this strip in intervals of about 5mm or 3/16 of an inch. This seemed to be working. Finally it felt like I was getting there. So then I thought it might be easier to make the border for around the front of the jumper first and attach it afterwards. Wrong. So using a ruler to make sure I got straight lines, I made the strip from the merino wool and then peeled it off, and so that doesn't work. All the ribbing effect just disappeared as I peeled it off the mat. But then I lightly stabbed a nice thick strip of merino wool around the base of the jumper, using pins to hold it in place, and then stabbed the lines at intervals all along the strip. They stayed visible and it worked much better. Yay, thank goodness. Then, to make it more obvious that this is a separate rib section of the jumper, I stabbed downwards and around the top of the strip to make it stand out from the rest of the jumper a bit more. Notice the angle of my needle. This helps to form that ridge. Then I did the same thing, wrapping a strip of wool around each cuff and stabbing lines to make the ribbed effect and defining the edge of the cuff. Although I'd made the head some time ago, I'll quickly go through how I made it. Firstly, I made a slightly oval ball. If you want more details on how to do this, I have a short video on how to needle felt a ball. I'll put a link in the description below. But basically, I tightly rolled up a strip of core wool and stabbed it all round until I had a slightly oval ball, wider than it is tall. I stabbed this for about 17 minutes to make sure it was quite firm. This makes it easier when it comes to putting the face on it. Then I covered it all over with light blue carded wool, stabbing it for another 5 or 6 minutes, which made it even firmer and gave it a nice smooth finish. Next, using cotton guides as I explained in my 5 tips on needle felting eyes, mouths and faces video, I marked out with just my needle where the whites of the eyes are positioned, referring to my image with the same guidelines. Then I marked where the mouth will go and the eyebrows, and remove the cotton guides. So take some white carded or merino wool and roll it into a ball. And take your time to fill each of the white areas of the eyes, stabbing round the outline first. To make a nose, I rolled some carded wool into a ball to estimate how big a nose that would make. Then pulled it apart slightly so I could shape it as I added it to the face. Make sure it's in the right place though, if not, you might want to pull it off and reposition. Knowing when to stop stabbing is tricky with this, but she only has a tiny nose, so don't stab it too much. To outline the eyes, take a small amount of dark blue carded or merino wool tops and twist it to make an extremely thin line of wool. Attach it at one end, around the edge of the white, and work your way around the eye, guiding it with your left or non-dominant hand as you stab it in place with your needle. Next, take 2 pieces of mid-blue carded or merino wool for the irises, and roll and stab into 2 small circles towards the top of the white area. Roll 2 tiny pieces of black wool between your fingers to get them the same size, and then attach each pupil in the centre of each iris, angling your needle into the centre of the pupil to guide the wool into a tiny dot. Do the same with 2 tiny dots of white, placing each one in the top right hand corner of each iris. Use some twisted mid-blue wool to felt the eyebrows in place in the same way as we did to outline the eyes, making sure that you follow the marks you made earlier. Her eyebrows kind of slant downwards and add to her sad expression. For the mouth, take a really tiny piece of dark blue carded or Merino Wool Tops and twist the wool to check how thin the line will be as we did before. Stab a very thin line along where we marked the mouth. So the next thing to do is to work out where the chenille stem will go into the head. Because at this point I look at my drawing and realise that even with her hair on her head, it's going to be smaller than it should be in relation to the body. I should have drawn around my pre-made head before drawing the body to make sure the proportions were right. Oh well, hopefully the addition of hair will help.
Really?
Well, hopefully. I marked with my needle where the pipe cleaner needs to enter the head and checked that I had it in the middle and in the right angle. Then I made a hole in the head with an awl, or you could use scissors, and make sure your chenille will go all the way into the head. As I was playing around with this, I realised that you might want to leave it like this without using glue, especially if your needle felting a posable doll to feature in animation, as this would mean that the head turns easily from side to side. However, if you're going to sell it or give it to somebody else, you'll need to glue it, as the head may well accidentally come off. So I decided it's best that I put a bit of super glue along the chenille and leave it to dry fully. While I was waiting for that to dry, I made a collar for her jumper out of some more white merino wool by felting a thick strip that's long enough to go right round her neck. By the way, sorry it's white on white, but I didn't want to contaminate the white wool with any wool from the mat. Once that was felted quite a bit, I added another layer of white wool on top and then used the same technique as before, drawing lines at intervals to felt the ribbed texture. But this time, because I'd stabbed the texture into the top unfelted layer and it had a well felted layer underneath, the top layer kept the texture when I removed it from the mat. I then neatened up the edge using a mat and sponge to hold it while I stabbed along the top edge of the collar, leaving the bottom edge fluffy to attach it with. And just to make the ribbing effect stand out a bit more, I went over the lines one more time. To attach it, I wrapped the collar around, making sure the join was at the back. I decided to make sure it was attached to the jumper only, so I stabbed along the rib marks and down into the jumper, but not up into the head. This was so that you can move the head unrestricted, forwards or backwards, to put Sadness in different positions. Looking at her image, I noticed that each side above her shoulders, the collar had a crease around the middle, so I pushed it in and stabbed along the crease to keep it in place, finishing it off by going over some of the lines and referring to my image often, guiding the collar to where it needed to be with my needle. So next is the Sadness's hair. I was a little nervous as I decided to use merino tops to create her hair, and I've never felted doll hair like this before. I'm gonna have the picture at the side of me here because this is stressful, to say the least. Also, I had to get a move on as I was running out of time. When I'd made Disgust, I used carded wool and felted that into the shape of her hair, but this would be very different. For starters, I decided where her parting was going to be and marked it just with my needle, just above the right side of her eyebrow. So then I started by taking some long pieces of the mid-blue or cornflower blue merino tops. I'll put details of where I got this from in the description. To create the first layer, I took a strip of blue merino wool, making sure it was longer than I needed, and placing it across her head from left to right, and stabbed it along where I'd marked the parting. Then I stabbed it loosely all over on the crown of her head to attach it. Only a tiny bit though, going over the parting a couple of times to make sure it's secure. Look at this hair, it's amazing. At this point, I was getting excited about how the hair had started to develop, but I wasn't out of the woods yet. To build up the height of her head and add a bit more to the back, I placed another layer of blue merino wool and felted down the parting line, and a bit further down the back in a line. However, I was getting excited too soon, as then I applied the next layer at the back of her head at a 90-degree angle to the parting, and created spiky Sadness. So I tried folding the spike down and stabbing it along the join, but then that left an ugly line on her head. Trying not to panic like this, I took another layer of wool and placed it over the line I'd just made to hide it, and stabbed along the parting again. Phew. I made sure I kept the parting only short and not right down the back. Then I teased the wool round the back to hide any gaps. So that seems to have worked, but I still didn't feel that there was enough volume on top of her head. So I took some more merino wool and cut one end so I had a straight edge, then felted this into the parting so there was very little on the right hand side. You can hide any of the short ends by angling your needle away from the crown and stabbing them lightly. So the next process was another scary bit. So first I trimmed the hair straight across, but so that it was still a bit too long. Be very careful doing this as there's no sticking it back on. I had dabbled in cutting hair during the lockdown, but I'm certainly not good at it. But I know that you get a more natural edge if you cut upwards towards the ends, so I tried that hoping for the best. It's at this point I realised I'd be a very poor hairdresser as I'd allowed my poor client to be covered in blue hair. So I get a plastic food bag and wrap it round her like a very own little hairdresser's cape. Looking at the back of her head, it looks like her hair must go from short on the left to slightly longer at the right, but mine was still a bit long on the right. So gradually angling the scissors upwards, I trimmed more length from the right side. To try and get her left fringe to stick out as it does on the picture, I teased the hair some more, only very lightly stabbing it, which seemed to work. However, this trimming and faffing about went on for some time, and gradually trimming a tiny bit more from round the back, until I was fairly happy with the results. I don't like it the way it looks in a minute. Does she look exactly like she does on the picture? No. I still had to make the glasses, which I had a feeling were going to be tricky, but I was fast running out of time.
Just give me a few hours. Oh!
But I didn't have a few hours, so sometimes you just have to move on and accept that that's the best you can do. I did try to make the glasses out of felt, but oh dear. No, I don't think so. So instead I tried using some 2mm aluminium wire which bends easily, and made the glasses by bending this wire around a pen top, which was about the right diameter. Once I'd done the first circle, I needed to make the bridge of her glasses, so I got my flat nose pliers. But thinking that they would damage the wire surface, I covered them in masking tape to protect the wire. But in the end, I found using my hands and the pen top easier. It's very fiddly. They were very fiddly, and there was more fiddliness to come. Also, I can hear you saying,
"But Julie, they're silver. That's not right."
yes, they are. So I decided to use a permanent marker to colour the wire, putting a layer of black all over the wire first, and then once that was dry, going over it with a dark purple colour as Sadness's glasses look a bit purple. However, I'd recommend that you buy some purple wire for this, as I think this coating I put on the glasses will come off after a while. So now then, you're thinking, how the heck are they going to sit on her face? So if you look at the picture, they hover, because it's animation and it can do what they like. There isn't actually any sides, just hover. By this time, as you can probably tell, I was getting a little bit frustrated. It was getting late and I should have finished her about an hour ago, but I had a cunning plan. I got my trusty nylon invisible thread that I use for the rabbits and cats' whiskers, and after giving poor Sadness a nose piercing that she never knew she wanted, I tied the invisible thread around either side of the bridge of the wire glasses, making sure it held the glasses in the right position, and then went back into poor Sadness's nose and out where you'd imagine her ear would be, except she hasn't got any ears. No wonder she's sad. Then I took the other end of the thread and made sure that it was wrapped around the glasses, and took that through her head to the same place. I then tied these two ends together to secure them and trimmed the ends off. There was some stiff competition during this, but attaching those glasses definitely wins the prize for the most fiddly.
Participation award.
So here she is, and because of her wire armature, she can imitate the real Sadness in various poses. And if you want to know how to felt hair with carded wool, click here and see how I made Disgust. Oh, and I'd be grateful if you'd click the like button and subscribe if you want more content like this. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.